Hello everyone, I'm Marcus Cheng, a retired police officer. Today, I'm going to share with you a real case I once worked on in my younger days. I'll illustrate the story with vivid visuals, some of which may be unsettling or even a bit disturbing. Please view with discretion. Real crime case. The corpse in the suitcase. In 2016, a crisp, cool autumn morning gently enveloped the city of Hong Kong. Beneath the thin morning mist, the moat-side embankmentas usual became a familiar gathering place for the elderly, where they immersed themselves in a leisurely pace of life after decades of hard work. The sound of footsteps mixed with birdsong, and the damp scent of morning dew mingled with the faint fragrance of wildflowers along the banks. Some elderly practiced Tai Chi, others strolled peacefully, while some sat chatting on moss-covered stone benches. Among them was a tall, robust old man with a full head of white hair, but a still rosy complexion. He stood by the railing, stretching his legs to warm up, his movements smooth and practiced as if he'd done them for decades. No one among them could have imagined that this seemingly tranquil morning would mark the beginning of a chilling series of events. Just as he was about to switch legs, the old man's eyes casually swept down to the slow-moving water below. A familiar sight, but today, something seemed off, making him furrow his brows. Near the edge of the bank, where reeds grew thick and wild, something pinkish-gray peeked out a large suitcase. But what caught his attention most was its shape. It was unnaturally swollen, as if something very large was inside. The old man frowned slightly. A few possibilities flashed through his mind. Garbage? Discarded belongings? Or had someone secretly dumped something illegal? The suitcase seemed to have drifted into this spot, covered in mud and with one side soaked from the water. A strange feeling crept into his chest, an indescribable gut instinct, like a hazy warning from a lifetime of experience. Perhaps there was something valuable inside, or perhaps something terrifying. Though retired for years, the curiosity of a former worker still burned within him. The old man took the risk, stepping carefully down the mossy slope, using his hand on his knee for balance to avoid slipping. After inching forward for a bit, he finally got close to the suitcase. Taking a deep breath, he gently used the tip of his walking stick to nudge the zipper. The suitcase slowly began to open. As soon as it cracked open, a strong, pungent stench hit his nose, making him grimace. Weak sunlight streamed through the gap, and then an arm flopped out, revealing pale skin marred by purple bruises. The old man stumbled backward in shock, dropping his walking stick, his mouth agape, choked with horror. Inside the suitcase was a human corpse, a dead woman. Sirens wailed in the distance, quickly cutting through the morning mist and drawing a curious crowd. Police arrived within minutes of the report. They swiftly set up barricades, cordoning off the entire riverside area. Yellow and black crime scene tape stretched across the path, keeping the onlookers at bay. As the forensic team prepared to arrive, officers began their preliminary investigation of the scene. A wave of tension rippled down the riverbank like an invisible tide. In the forensic lab, the cold fluorescent lights illuminated every detail of the woman's body. Gloved hands worked methodically, scribbling notes, and the click of cameras echoed steadily. The chief medical examiner, a middle-aged man with deep-set eyes, began his inspection. Initial signs suggested this was no ordinary death. They collected tissue samples, examined for signs of strangulation, and prepared DNA comparisons with the criminal database. A crime was gradually being pieced together through layers of skin and every bruised mark. After nearly 8 hours of examination, preliminary results emerged. The victim was female, around 30 years old, approximately 160 centimeters tall. There were no identification papers in the woven bag, and her fingerprints were partially destroyed due to prolonged water exposure. However, forensic experts still managed to extract partial fingerprint data. While waiting for results from the database, police began reconstructing the victim's profile. A young woman, murdered and dismembered, her body parts stuffed into a suitcase and thrown into the river. Inside the suitcase were several cheap clothing items, mostly old and worn. But what drew the investigation team's attention was the victim's underwear. It was high-end, from a luxury brand found only in upscale shopping centers. This contrast puzzled the task force. Was the victim a poor woman, or did she have a more complex background than she appeared? They decided to follow the lead on the lingerie label, hoping to trace its origin. As the body was cleaned for a more thorough examination, forensics discovered a key detail: a rose tattoo located on the left side of the victim's chest. It wasn't large, but the fine lines indicated it had been done by a professional artist. Police immediately photographed and documented it, marking it as a crucial clue. They began contacting local tattoo parlors and cross-referencing records of individuals with similar tattoos. It was a slim lead, but any detail might be the key to unraveling this dark and disturbing case. An emergency meeting was held immediately at the investigation team's headquarters. A small room flooded with the cold glow of fluorescent lights. On the board was a large printed diagram of the crime scene. Next to it, photos of the body, the rose tattoo, and the evidence found in the suitcase. Lieutenant Zhang, who was in charge of the case, was meticulously analyzing the situation, stressing the urgent need to track down the killer as soon as possible. He stated that the victim's identity was still unknown for now, but it was clearly not a random murder. She had been killed and stuffed into a suitcase, a sign of calculated disposal. The atmosphere in the room was as heavy as lead. Several hypotheses were proposed, but none clear enough to point to the killer's trail. The forensics team analyzed the victim's profile based on what was left. Her skin was smooth and fair, untanned. Her nails were well groomed. There were traces of lipstick on her lips, though faded due to water exposure. This was not a woman who worked in the fields, nor was she involved in manual labor. One investigator remarked that the woman likely enjoyed beautifying herself and wore makeup frequently. She clearly lived in an urban setting, or at the very least was someone who interacted with a higher than average level of social life. The physical analysis continued to shape the image of the victim, a woman who might have lived a double life. Details about her branded lingerie led police to lean toward the theory that the victim may have worked in a sensitive service industry. Coupled with her well-maintained appearance and the mismatch between her cheap outerwear and luxurious underwear, the investigation team speculated the victim could have been a sex worker or someone involved in similar activities. Lieutenant Zhang calmly stated that he did not wish to judge the dead. But if this theory held true, the circle of suspects would have to be expanded to include clients, brothel operators, and unregistered motels. The forensics team released their official conclusion after completing the autopsy. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. There were faint marks around the neck, consistent with strangulation by hand, or a soft object, possibly a towel, cloth, or belt. There were no other major injuries, indicating that the victim was not tortured or beaten before death. The report clearly stated that the victim had been strangled to death approximately 3 days prior to the discovery of the body. This further supported the theory that the killer had a clear motive and carried out the act in a discreet, controlled environment. Despite the valuable insights provided by the forensic team, identifying the victim remained extremely difficult. The body had been submerged in water for several days, causing the skin on the fingertips to swell and peel. Technicians attempted to recover the fingerprints using chemical methods, but the results were faint and not immediately usable. Meanwhile, the national database had not returned any matches. Police were forced to temporarily shift focus to other clues: the tattoo, lingerie, and other body identifiers. The tech lab light stayed on late into the night. In front of a screen displaying magnified fingerprint images, a technician shook his head, eyes never leaving the keyboard. He told the entering investigator that the prints were severely damaged, so they were now using electronic recovery methods, but there were still no matches in the system. More time was needed. Lieutenant Zhang sighed. He knew that time was the enemy in every criminal case. Without confirming the victim's identity, every other lead was like searching for a needle in a haystack. For now, he would let the forensic team work. The police's task was to broaden the investigation, start with the tattoo and the lingerie. Two urgent investigative paths were assigned. One team was tasked with inspecting tattoo parlors across the city, from licensed establishments to underground shops hidden in motels and bars. The other team visited high-end fashion boutiques, inquiring about the lingerie worn by the victim. The list of tattoo parlors was long. Each day, investigators carried a photo of the rose tattoo to ask around if any female clients had recently requested such a design. Most shop owners said they had never seen it before. They noted that the rose looked roughly done, like a beginner's attempt. The lingerie was even more challenging. While the design was luxurious, it wasn't exclusive. Hundreds of stores could have sold a piece just like it, and none kept customer records. A week passed before they finally found a lead at a small tattoo shop beneath an old apartment building in the city. The shop owner recognized the tattoo as his own work. He told the officer that over a year ago, he had tattooed that exact rose design for a female client. He remembered her clearly because she was quite beautiful and lived in the old apartment building above. The tattooist also shared some details about her occupation. She indeed worked as a sex worker. She was very discreet, slept during the day, and only went out to bars at night, returning home early in the morning. With the new information about the girl, the National Fingerprint Database finally began to yield results. The 3D interface started analyzing intersecting points. The scanning pace accelerated, and frame after frame appeared before the investigators' expectant eyes. A beep echoed through the control room. The result appeared. Liu Dim Dim, female, born in 1985, registered in a suburban district of Hong Kong, previously filed for citizen administrative records. No criminal history. A name, a photo, an electronic file. The final piece of the identity puzzle had been put in place. The next morning, a task force was dispatched to Liu Dim Dim's registered address. It was in a mountainous area on the outskirts of Hong Kong City. Following the victim's information, an officer arrived at the correct address. After knocking on the door, the officer showed the homeowner a photo of the girl and asked if they recognized her. The middle-aged woman immediately recognized the girl in the photo as her niece. Her eyes reddened, and she looked like she could barely stand. She stared at the photo for a long time. Her hands trembled, her lips moved, but no words came out. Her husband, standing beside her, tried to confirm the information. The presence of the police was enough for him to know that something terrible had happened to his niece. After inviting the police officers into their home, the elderly couple began providing information about their niece, Liu Dim Dim. The woman choked up as she explained that Liu Dim Dim had lost both her parents 3 years ago. Since then, the girl had moved in to live with them. Last year, she said she wanted to go to the city to work and earn money, so the woman agreed. Each month, Dim Dim would send money back home, but for over a month now, there had been nothing. Dim Dim rarely called, and the woman assumed her niece was simply focusing on work in the city and didn't want to disturb her. The police, in order to keep information confidential for the investigation, only told the couple they were looking into Lu Dim Dim's whereabouts and didn't disclose that she had died. Then the woman added that just 2 days ago, the girl had still been texting her. The police were surprised and asked if she might be mistaken. However, the aunt pulled out her phone and showed them the messages. The conversation was still there, with clear timestamps, all after the time the forensic team had determined Dim Dim was already dead. One of the investigators turned pale and quietly questioned, "If Dim Dim is dead, then who's using her account?" There was another piece of information. Dim Dim had recently been arguing a lot with her boyfriend named Jukun, a man a few years older than her, living in a neighboring city. The couple added that every time she changed her number, Jukun would always find it again. Dim Dim even once said, "I might be able to escape from anyone, but never from Jukun." That statement cut like a knife, slowly slicing through what little piece remained. A name was beginning to rise at the very center of the storm. The police decided not to confront him directly. They asked Dim Dim's mother to call Jukun and pretend to check in on her daughter, asking if he had seen Dim Dim lately, if she was doing well. On the other end of the line, the man's voice was clear. He said Dim Dim was gone. He claimed that she had told him she was going to Macau on the 20th of August to look for work and hadn't contacted him since. An investigator immediately made a note. Departure date confirmed, 8/20. After the call ended, Captain Zhang turned to his assistant, raising doubts because he remembered that detail vividly. It was too specific, too soon to recall such a precise date without a reason. Not everyone can remember an exact date unless something significant happened that day. But according to their records, the 20th of August held no special meaning. No birthdays, no festivals, no notable events. A suspicion suddenly sparked. Could that be the day he killed her? What drew the most attention wasn't what he said, but how he said it. He seemed intent on emphasizing that date. The repeated mention made it feel less like a coincidence and more like a clue. A quick background check was conducted. The technical team located Ho Jukun's current residence, a rental unit near the southern industrial zone of the city. Without delay, police were dispatched to bring Jukun in for questioning. At the police station, he was taken into the interrogation room, his expression relatively calm. He sat down, looked around, and tried to give a polite smile, asking why he had been summoned. Two investigators sat across from him and began the interrogation. Jukun repeatedly deflected questions and denied any romantic relationship with Lu Dim Dim. He claimed they had broken up and hadn't seen each other since. Meanwhile, another investigative team was sent to search Jukun's residence. The police headed straight to the security office of the apartment complex and requested access to the surveillance footage, focusing on the elevator area, the place that most caught the investigators' attention. Over 20 hours of footage were sifted through, fast-forwarded, trimmed frame by frame. Finally, the elevator camera footage from the 20th of August marked a turning point. 3 people appeared in the footage: Jukun, his mother, and his younger brother. All 3 faces were tense, cautious. They were transporting something hidden under a trolley, their behavior highly suspicious. The lead investigator clenched the case file tightly. There was no doubt anymore. He wasn't acting alone. With such damning evidence in hand, the team leader didn't need to ask much. He simply showed Jukun the still image captured from the elevator and began questioning him relentlessly. Jukun's eyes flickered. His breath quickened. There was no way out. And then he said the words every investigator had been waiting for. He confessed to killing Lu Dim Dim. His voice was hoarse, his eyes clouded, cast downward. He recounted how everything had been sweet in the beginning. Lu Dim Dim said she worked at a fashion store. They met online, went on dates, and fell in love. The feelings were real. The promises were sincere. He once thought he would marry her. But what happened afterward turned into a nightmare. He said at first she was gentle, always texting and calling him, so he believed everything she said. She claimed she worked retail in a fashion shop. He had no reason to doubt her. But the night she didn't come home, the interrupted calls, the secretive messages, he began to suspect. One day, he secretly checked her phone, and everything fell apart. Love turned into doubt. Ho-Ju-kun began to realize those nights when Lu Dim Dim didn't come home weren't because of night shifts at the fashion store as she claimed. The messages on her phone were like knives stabbing into his pride. Clients, prices, appointments. There was no love in any of it. His fist clenched. The phone trembled in his hands. The woman he loved wasn't who he thought she was. Lu Dim Dim knew everything had been exposed. She fell to her knees, crying until her voice was hoarse. She said she had no other choice. Her aunt needed money for medical treatment, and she had no way out. Those words felt like salt on his wounds, but he didn't shout, didn't hit, didn't break anything. He just held her and forgave her because he still loved her. But love wasn't enough to hold on to someone who was spiraling out of control. After that day, he stubbornly clung to her promise of changing careers. But not only did Dim Dim not stop, she even started using drugs. She became thinner, more impulsive, and they fought constantly, often over the smallest things. The small home, once filled with joy, was now saturated with suspicion, bitterness, and despair. Then came the day when he realized he couldn't take it anymore. His job was unstable, his income meager, not nearly enough to support someone who always wanted money, drugs, and fancy clothes. And then the inevitable happened. She wanted to break up. Lu Dim Dim walked out after a fierce argument. Ju-kun felt indignant. He had loved her, pampered her for so long, until he was drained, and now she scorned him and demanded a breakup. He felt furious and resentful. Blinded by rage, he wrapped his hands around her neck. There was the sound of struggling, the stomping of feet, and then silence. He let go. She lay still. A flicker of hope sparked in him. Maybe she just passed out. He reached out and touched her nose. No breath. In a state of utter panic, Ju-kun felt a coldness settle deep within. Lu Dim Dim had stopped breathing, yet she still lay there, her face completely devoid of life. There was nothing he could do but drag her into the room, frantic like a trapped animal. Everything around him darkened. Her death plunged him into a deep, inescapable abyss. He quickly called his younger brother and his mother. Cold sweat covered his forehead as he desperately begged them to come. Immediately, he didn't know what to do. After hanging up, he collapsed to the ground, staring at her lifeless body in despair. It was all too late. When his mother and younger brother arrived, Ju-kun sat silently, not daring to meet their eyes. After a long silence, his mother and brother decided they would help him deal with the body. This couldn't be discovered, because now both of them were accomplices. There was no other way out. Together, they dragged the girl's body into the bathroom, used a cleaver to dismember her into small pieces, then stuffed them into a large suitcase. Then all three of them took the suitcase to the riverside and threw it in to dispose of the evidence. They made up a story that Lu Dim Dim had gone to Macau. They said she used a fake ID and couldn't be contacted anymore, a simple, believable excuse. And to avoid raising suspicion, Jukun continued using Lu Dimdim's phone number to text her aunt back in the countryside. The police wouldn't find anything as long as no one knew the truth. They couldn't let the truth be revealed. In the end, Jukun realized that what he once thought was just a moment of recklessness now came with an unbearable price. He hadn't just taken the life of an innocent woman, he had destroyed his own life. And with him, his brother and mother were dragged into the whirlpool of sin he created. One moment of weakness, one mistake, and now he would have to face all its consequences. There was no escape.